Welcome and namaste, everyone. How good it is to be here with you again today. Start a new book today, one that I particularly enjoy. Well, I enjoy them all, but this one I particularly enjoy because it's a book of short stories. Times like these lead us to all kinds of memories, with many stories to tell and enjoy. As I reread these stories, and as I read them to you, I know they're going to be tickling me in various places, either to be re-celebrated yet again, or to see if I'm stuck with a little something that needs a repair. Stories are wonderful that way. They put us in connection with our inner self, which is what all of my books are about in one way or another, and what life is about in a very real way. So Thanks for the Yellow Roses is a series of short stories garnered from a life of love all can fully witness in each moment of now. All real, yet some reimagined, these stories will resonate with your joy-filled heart and tear-filled moments, triggering many of your own short stories, which is the point of this book really, for you to come in contact with your own short stories, and to encourage you to share those with all you touch, inspiring them to also be storytellers. Our world is so short of storytellers these days, at least for the kinds of stories that put us in touch with our heart. And so I'll start with the first one today, which is called Why Didn't God Take Me? Interesting title, this. It's a cloudless, blue-skied morning in northern New Mexico. I wind my way through the hills on the high road to Taos, my camera ready on the seat beside me. I began the day wanting only to be open to the gift of the people I am on my way to photograph. They live in a tiny, predominantly Hispanic village called Chuchas. Chuchas meaning trout in Spanish. Couched atop a plateau at the foot of the Chuchas Peaks and the Sangre de Cristo mountain range. One of the peaks reports a large cross on its crest, seemingly to protect the inhabitants of this quaint village from harm. Nature's setting calls forth feelings of welcome. Its endearing features are the aging adobe homes, unpaved streets, and its people, the warm and generous elderly people and those they raised in semi-poverty, and now yet another younger generation. The village is sprinkled with art galleries, bed and breakfast inns, its own general store, and a gasoline pump or two. Until now, Chuchas has perhaps best been known by outsiders as a setting for the 1980s Robert Redford movie Milagro Beanfield War, and for its then lone restaurant, the Chuchas Mountain Cafe, written about in a New York Times years ago as the place to warm your belly with authentic Mexican food. The remnants of movie sets are a lingering reminder of exciting times for the few who remain from that scene. The divorced proprietors of the cafe, for example, have gone their separate ways, passing their former havens through the hands of local realtors onto yet another gallery for local artists. And life goes on in Chuchas. I shift into second gear so I can make the grade past the first of several outposts of local artisans' wares. I take special note of the cemetery filled with brightly colored plastic flowers, embraced by the azure blue skies and the craggy peaks sprinkled with freshly dropped snow. Suddenly, my instincts lead me to apply brakes so I can view a particularly unusual gravesite more closely. The site is adorned with two wrought iron renditions of motorcycles straddling a straw-covered mound. Having often wondered what prompted this unusual form of burial, something within me moves to create several images I can use for later reflection. And by the way, this book has numerous photographic images to emphasize some of the things that are said. So if you want to see the pictures, you're going to have to get the book. Moved by this episode, I forged my way up the hills yet further, catching the vast expanse stretching out behind me in my rearview mirror. Soon I come upon the landmarks that welcome visitors to the village. Mostly they are signs of times past. A dilapidated barn, groaning as it leans on one side, much like the hillside upon which it rests. A year-round Christmas star perches precariously on the edge of its leaky roof. Next to the barn is a sight familiar to most travelers on this route. A large, aging wooden cross outlined by Christmas lights jutting into the sky like a ponderosa pine announcing its rightful place in the world. My heart mellows at the sight, softened even further by the memories of having looked after a gallery in town with my former spouse at Christmas time some 7 years earlier. In my peripheral vision, I sensed the intrusion of the more modern-day glistening metallic pole with Chuchas, New Mexico, glaring from the cold green state highway sign riveted on top, and my heart goes into a sort of lurch. I stop the car and exit to view this contrasting juxtaposition of the past and present from my knees, recording the unsettling composition somewhat in dismay. My appointment is for 9 o'clock in the morning. It had come about rather circuitously. Earlier in the summer, on a plane over the Atlantic on the way to Greece, I felt prompted to take on the project of photographing elderly women in villages, both on the islands I would be visiting and on the mainland where my late father's surviving family still lives. The working title, Woman of the Village, came to me and guided me on my way. It had been a rather profound coming to that point, for all at once I felt tugging within me compassion and love for the elderly women who at one time were the center of their immediate and extended families, but who now seem to be all but forgotten. Such women, their hearts filled with love, faces creased with wisdom, and eyes filled with dignity, have a presence of such elegance as to open the hearts and souls of all who take a moment to notice. I'll do my part to see that they are remembered, I heard my inner self proclaim. Just as vividly on the return trip to Santa Fe, I recalled my original vision taking new shape. I felt the necessity to extend my heartfelt search to include elderly women of villages in my own region of New Mexico, and then on to other regions of the United States and even other countries. For one who sees with a heart, life's staples of elegance and dignity can be found everywhere. I mentioned the idea to my tax accountant one time, and she suggested I visit some elderly friends of hers in Chuchas, where she also lives. So I began by arranging this appointment to photograph several elderly Hispanic women, followed with an inner commitment to photograph others as they come into my journey. Still a bit displeased by the double message from the symbolic signpost at the entry to the village, but somewhat more detached than earlier, I searched for the designated location noted on my hand-scribbled scrap of notepaper. After a slightly confused attempt to locate the residence, it suddenly becomes clear to me that this is the place. A large, gray, stucco rectangle planted catty-corner to the restored church now used only infrequently by the local penitentes. Not knowing quite to expect, I gather my equipment and somewhat tentatively ring the doorbell. I peer through the lace curtains, letting the voices inside tempt an analysis of who might greet me. The door opens slowly, and this beaming face of a woman greets me as if a long-lost friend has just graced her threshold. "Good morning. Come in, come in. I'm Susie. Come in." I introduce myself and ease into the warmth of what seems like a combination living room bedroom. Suddenly I am consumed by the smells and sounds of a country breakfast being prepared in a small, boxy kitchen, barely large enough to contain a wood stove, oversized refrigerator, sink, small aging wooden kitchen table, and a tiny washstand with water, soap, and towel ready to greet the next user. "Come in," implores Susie. "We're just having breakfast. We hope we won't hold you up, though. Would you like a tortilla? I'm just making them fresh." "Oh, just a cup of coffee would be fine, thank you," I respond, stepping further into the toasty kitchen to meet Susie's daughter, Kathy, and Kathy's husband, John, along with two young boys, actually the couple's grandchildren, Daryl, 5, and Andrew, age 4. They're all in various stages of breakfast. Kathy and John appear too young to be grandparents. We exchange greetings, and before I retreat into the living room to sip on the freshly brewed coffee, I watch intently as Susie kneads a tortilla, lovingly embracing it between her palms. It's clear that the tortilla hugs her back. While I sip coffee in the comfort of the sparsely furnished room, I am bathed in the early morning light that drifts in through the lacy yellow curtains adorning the entry door, spreading a buttery cast on the wall beyond. 2 miniature Pueblo-style wood ladders, the type sold to tourists, guard the entry door. Several straight-back chairs with cushions of varying sizes and shapes line a buttery wall like wooden toy soldiers. 2 double beds jutting out from the opposite wall brace a scattering of plants in between, and pictures of Jesus and family members filling the wall greet the knowing eye. A few ristras, strings of dried red chili peppers, frame a quote about mothers. A rose is as tender as a mother's heart. Any doubt I may have had about this being the place to be immediately vanishes. Susie anxiously tells me several times that she doesn't want to waste my time and informs me that she needs to call her sister Fetty so she can join us from her home nearby. Before making the call, Susie introduces me to her 93-year-old mother, Leodarnita. I still have to brush out her hair, proclaims Susie, and we'll have to get her out of the housecoat for the picture she issues. Don't make any fuss, Susie. I want only to create images as they show up naturally, I respond. She pays absolutely no attention to me and goes about her way. I smiled inwardly. As she heads toward the phone to summon her sister, Susie brings me 2 rather worn-out journals and a well-read copy of a newspaper about times past. Proudly, she points to the article about her mother, and another about how she and her mother had been included in the movie the Milagro Beanfield War, utilizing their cozy kitchen. I read them with great interest as she makes her telephone call. When she returns from the conversation with her sister, Susie asks me in rapid-fire fashion about my background, where I live, and what brought me to churches. Her interest peaks when I tell her that my former wife and I attended a gallery just up the street a few years ago during the holidays. Then when I indicate that we had looked at property there as a possible location for a home, she immediately becomes helpful by offering information about 8 acres up for sale just up the road at about $20,000 an acre. But you could sell off 2/3 of it, if you think it's too expensive. We talk about the sad condition of rising taxes and other costs elevated by outsiders purchasing property and starting galleries and such in the community. They say the new galleries will make us famous again, make it good. But most of us just can't keep up with the higher taxes and costs, she deplores. I am delighted when she spices up the running conversation with a pero, and bueno now and then. Susie's sister, Fede, arrives. There is an unmistakable family resemblance which shows itself in looks, patterns of speech, and body language. At one point when we are alone in our conversation, Fede gets up from her chair and fetches a photocopy of a picture. It is of her granddaughter alongside her motorcycle. She haltingly tells me of how her granddaughter had been killed riding it just 2.5 months ago. Slowly, Fede returns the picture to its place on the bed just beneath the portrait of Jesus, and tears paint a portrait of her sadness. In that instant, I know why I had been drawn to the grave site guarded by motorcycles, and I joined Fede on her canvas of life. By now, the 2 young children have grown curious and begin to show interest in this stranger in their midst. They both have freshly cut, close-cropped hair. They approach daringly and gleefully, taking to rubbing the stubble on their heads. I teach them about their age, and Andrew asks me how old I am. After I respond with a playful, I'm 87, Andrew races to the kitchen to ask his grandfather how old he is. I hear an amused response delivered with a chuckle. Oh, well, I'm 88. Meanwhile, Daryl shows me his booklet of 152 self-adhesive animal stickers and eventually places a parrot delicately on my shoulder as well as on his own. We playfully squawk at one another. Betty repeats the fact that there are 4 generations represented in the house that morning. Her mother, she and her sister, her daughter and husband, and 2 grandchildren. The mother is in Colorado, or we'd have 5 generations here, she instructs. My father's in jail, you know, Daryl innocently informs me. I'm rather startled by his frank admission, but make nothing of it by dismissing it with a simple, non-judgmental, oh, that's interesting. I ease into photographing by framing a portrait of Leo Darnado and, bit by bit, include others until each of the 4 generations has been added to the family bouquet. Chatter abounds, the children come and go, and directions come from the daughters and other family members to great-great-grandmother to help her keep focused. Leo Darnita shows her humble attitude by barely looking directly into the camera. But the others want the usual "Say Jesus" pose the children comically display when it comes their turn. Somewhat surprised by the large amount of film I am using, I back off for a bit to see what might better come next. I choose to photograph in natural light only, so I'm careful in my discernment. I decide to shift my location to the other side of the room, and I open the front door to let in more of that warm morning sun, and it turns out to be a good decision. At this point, I limit the photos of Susie, Fede, and their mother and boys. Leonora springs to life and hugs the boys as they squirm to get in her lap, eager to be closer to her. First one and then the other wiggles in her embrace, and the group takes on a special radiance. I retreat to my wide-angle lens and record the grandparents' glee over what they are witnessing by reflecting them in the mirror on the wardrobe nearby. Pardon me. That about wraps it up for the morning. Things seem to be complete, so I begin packing my equipment. I am feeling privileged to have been taken into the life of this wonderfully warm and generous family. My attention shifts dramatically when Andrew and Daryl begin to lay barrages of hugs and kisses on Leo Darnita. I quickly pull out my camera and let the bliss of the moment be captured on the film. Much of what I am taking in through the viewfinder is also etching a permanent image on the lining of my heart. After repacking, I am gifted by hugs from the entire family and feel filled with blessings. Susie and Fede invite me to return in December to photograph them making holiday cookies. As I had already promised them, I would return with some prints of today's work. This is a welcome invitation. I immediately accept. As I wind my way back toward home, I find myself in the warm glow I felt all throughout the morning. The thought occurs to me that in my own family I am missing the love, caring, and nurturing found in close family relationships like the one I have just witnessed, but I'm living quite a ways from my family now. Right then and there, though, I vow to rekindle that flame. On the way down the hill toward Chimayo, I am strangely prompted to look at my reading glasses and make a thorough search of my pockets and the front seat, but to no avail. I bring the car to a stop and look through my camera gear. Not finding the glasses, I reverse my route to re-engage my new friends. I ring the doorbell, turning the knob with ease. This time there is no chatting behind the entry, and the door opens quickly. There stands Susie with her usual broad smile, proclaiming knowingly, "You are just like me. Some days I don't even know where my head is." She beckons me to enter and goes to the kitchen, and I trail behind. She plucks my battered glass case off the stove and drops it into my expectant hand amidst my immediate expression of gratitude. Fitty is washing dishes and points with pride to the array of family photos thumbtacked along both sides of the door jamb. "Look at all those grandchildren and great-grandchildren," exclaimed Susie, taking over for the more reluctant Fitty. "You know, we've lost only one 26-year girl and one 27-year-old boy out of all those children," she informed me as I am let out of the kitchen. "Do you know what my mother said when we lost them?" she asked. "No," I said, "I have no idea." She said, why didn't God take me instead of them? I've had a long and good life." "Can you imagine her?" said Susie. And the whole morning once again comes sharply into focus. As we head out of the kitchen, I notice Christmas cactus ready in bloom and tell them how much I love ours. "Oh, that's Maria," said Susie. "Maria?" I asked. "Yes, that's Aunt Maria to me. She always had a beautiful Christmas cactus in the house, and this reminds me of her, so I call it Maria." Not wanting to be left out, Fetty joins in escorting me out to my car. She offers to have me stop at the Dunkin' Donuts on the way down so one of her grandchildren who works there can treat me on the way home. I gratefully decline and thank them again for their generous hospitality. Susie walks beside the car, guiding me from my parking spot out between her house and the neighbors. She then carefully leads me to the main street that bisects the quaint village. I roll down the passenger window and bid Susie a final "hasta luego," and she in return delivers a gleeful "hasta pronto" on the end of her waving arm. As I edge toward home, I suddenly realize that what had earlier seemed like incongruous welcome signs at the edge of the town are no longer troubling me. And a deep sigh takes me to a state of inner knowing as I pass the brace of motorcycles in the cemetery down below. And so that ends the first story. Interestingly, this is being read to you on the week before Thanksgiving. What a wonderful thing to be grateful for, our life stories. After all, they tell us so much about what our life has been, what they are. And it's just, we need to engage those more, to be thankful for them more. It's such a rich life that we can live. Well, we'll be together again next week, the Wednesday after Thanksgiving, for another chapter from this book, Thanks for the Yellow Roses. I like to close these sessions with a little something I've seen the week before on the internet. This one is from Marianne Williamson. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. And our stories come from our natural creative being. And so think back of some stories, begin to write them down, even share them. The holidays are coming up, so wonderful time for story sharing. Okay, folks, I look forward to being with you next week. Namaste. I love you.